Greetings, this is Craig Pepin, Project Lead for the Davis Grant. Thank you for listening to this audio recording from the Spring 2024 Competency Fellows Workshop Series. These workshops are funded by a grant from the Davis Educational Foundation, and together with other materials funded by the grant and available on the Competencies website, are designed to help enhance your understanding and learning of Champlain College competencies. Today's workshop, titled Visual Insight, Enhancing Communication Skills, is led by Suzanne Snyder, our Communication Fellow.
All right, so I'd like to make this as informal as possible. So I would say just interrupt me if you have a question rather than waiting for a particular time. And I'm going to kind of go through this. What I was saying is that this is particularly timely for two reasons. One, in the fact that the school is, as you all know, is looking at new curriculum and how we can share coursework across the school for a lot of different reasons. And what that means is that the graphic design courses will be more available to non-majors. It also means that a lot of the coursework, as it overlaps and creates connections, will use visual prompts. And there has been a big concern in the field, in particular when I went to NASED, the annual meeting this year, which is the National Association of Art and Design Colleges. There was a lot of talk about how we teach non-majors that are potentially non-visual, how to work with communications, visual communications. So they're being asked to design posters, videos, presentations, but they have absolutely no visual communication skills. They haven't been taught. They are completely like a deer in headlight. It also becomes increasingly difficult to assess them when they're combined with visual students that have been doing this their whole lives, whether that's in high school, but even before high school, they probably had private lessons. They've been in this visual world pretty much their entire life, as compared to someone that, maybe did sports and did not do any athletics. Any visual classes. So anyway, this is becoming a lot more relevant as we progress, both here at Champlain and also across education in general. So when I first got this competency, I thought, I'm going to get creative. And instead of, I got communication, which in the end has been, I think, the best choice for me because that's what we are. But when I got here, I read this. And does anybody notice anything unusual about our current competency? I'll let you ask. Visual. There's nothing visual in it. So we go to the point of making reading, thinking, writing, and speaking to convey ideas. But in a school of around 700 plus visual students that go to Champlain, there's no visual. So that's kind of unusual. So once I saw that, I thought, okay, well, that's something to think about. And then I just started pulling at the thread of how do you teach visual communication to a school that has a mixed group of students. So we're going to look at this kind of quickly. I have an introduction. I have some objectives of why this work needs to get done. And then I have 4 different exercises. And the exercises, and my first thought was that we would all do all of them. And then I was like, wait a minute, you have an hour. That's not happening. So we're not doing all of them, but I would like to do one. So we'll see how you guys feel about that. And then I'd like us to return to this and think about, how does this work going forward? Do we need to change what this reads as? Do we have to make modifications as we get down into what we're assessing? Like, what do we do here? It's very complicated. So let's start. All right, so visual communications is everywhere, as you all know. Non-designers don't have necessarily training in it, but they have access to it. So you'll see that design, there's templates all over. I just was working with a client who uses Canva, and I had never even been in Canva, and there's a lot you can do in Canva. I was super impressed. It's a free tool. My clients are using it. So there's a lot out there, but you can look at a whole bunch of videos. It still doesn't teach you how to design. And what we're getting are pages that are crammed with too much information, not knowing where your eye should go, not knowing how to organize hierarchically. It seems kind of a disastrous mess. And I'm not talking about our students now, I'm talking about my client. But students also. So you might assign them a poster. Maybe it's in a core class, maybe it's somewhere else, maybe it's part of the convivium. But they don't know what to do. So you assign this to them, and they're like deer in headlights. And what I have been told by my students is then they come to the graphic designers, the animators, and they say, you have to help me with this. I have no idea what I'm doing. So the students are helping students, which is absolutely wonderful. But I do think that as faculty, we have a responsibility to make sure that we're educating students in areas where we expect them to create. And so it's not that they can't, they have two problems, basically. They can't create form, and they don't know how to start to create form. And I think the latter is the most difficult. They're, again, like deer in headlights. They don't know how to begin. They've never sketched. They don't know how to draw. And so you're asking them to create a visual output with absolutely no background in it. So when we do try to teach students that are non-visual how to create posters, they can't have the same classes as visual students. We actually did this a long time ago in the business division. They were taking graphic design classes and they were not passing them. And it's not their fault. It's that if you think about it, a graphic designer that comes here has a portfolio that they submit, and they may have taken classes all through high school, maybe all through their life. And so their ability to swim in a graphic design class is quite different than someone that is brand new to it. So having said that, what we looked at as a field when I was at NASED, that's why I said this is kind of perfect timing, was how do we teach visual ideas in a humanities-based space. And so doing that is really crucial for Champlain because we are a humanities-based college, and it really is important to teach visuals. So I'm looking at a few different ways to think about this. And I've developed 4 exercises, not by myself, along with some of my peers at NASED. We talked about this and sketched them out. And so this is sort of a collective idea, not just my own. So the objectives of these was really to cultivate, let's take it back a minute. If I'm trying to teach designers how to design, we give assignments that are normally topic-based, and its purpose is to cultivate creativity. That's absolutely impossible for the point that I just said before. The students that you're teaching in the humanities that may be majoring in psychology or something else, they don't have drawing skills. So take it back. How are they going to sketch and how are they going to iterate when they have not had any drawing or any photography or any other way to sketch? It's asking quite a bit. So instead of focusing on the form, which is what we currently do and most colleges do, like make a poster, it would be better to actually focus on the first 3 steps of the visual communication process, which is defining what the problem is, collecting, that's the key word, and analyzing information, and then enhancing and developing those ideas. So coming from an analytical standpoint rather than a creative standpoint, right? Does that make sense? And then that phase, those first 3 things that you see up here are really for making meaning, and the last 2 are for making form. So if we separate this out, we're able to actually design exercises that work in those first 3 in skills that they already have and skills that they're currently developing in their own disciplines. Yes?
Well, when you say form, what sense do you mean there?
I mean making things. So you can say assets or you can say form, but things like that brochure, that poster, that video. Those are what I'm talking about is actually the form the communication takes after all the research is completed. Yeah. Okay. All right, so if we teach students how to observe consciously and be able to see and appreciate the visual qualities of what they can see, and it's really useful to use photographs and and things that are out there. I mean, the internet is full of examples that you can study and analyze to learn visual relationships, etc. And you can ask them to learn to see, which is always the first step in any designer. I mean, it sounds kind of like, I don't know, like you've heard this a million times, but we're really asking them to learn to see. They have to be trained on how to learn to see before they can make. And they have between learning to see and making, there's analyzing and researching. So you can see that's pretty important. They have to be able to articulate in words what they see. And that's really critical. And skills that I would say most of the students don't have if they haven't taken art classes. Like, how do you talk about things that you see? And then they have to be able to flip it and take those words and make images based on what they think. So it's like a process that kind of goes back and forth. So they have to be able to see, they can verbalize what they see. Once they can verbalize what they see, then they can recontextualize what they saw before and then go on to make more things. They have to be able to present in class and feel confident enough to give criticism and receive criticism, which is, very difficult. So the first thing that you can do is you can say, instead of, jumping immediately to making posters, perhaps the thing to do is to use Google Slides and a cell phone, because that's all you need to start this process of analyzing and looking. And then you would be able to go from there. Looking at the Google Slides, using them as reference and self-reflection to go back on what they're looking for, being able to write in templates. So perhaps templates need to be designed and given to students that are being asked to create some of this work. Then being able to construct the evaluations from their peers to focus on uniqueness and concept and clarity versus I like yellow, right? So you're training students to critique in areas that they can do because they've learned how to analyze. So, and then questionnaires rather than free form might be better. So you can ask a question, so they're fed the right vocabulary, it triggers their memory, and they can learn to start to review their own work and those of other people. You should not be critiquing on whether something is blue or green. The aesthetic end of that should be left alone. You're really looking at critiquing exploration, originality, and expression. So the following exercises focus on 4 different areas that we at Champlain College ask of our students already, and they only require Google Slides and a phone. So I think that anyone in the school could run these exercises to help educate students in visual communication. All right, here we go. Anybody have any questions before I hit this? Yes?
I'm just thinking about the audience.
Yep.
How when you're creating your visual tool, right? And like students in the making and doing classes right now are developed, right? Or at some point in the semester are developing posters to do surveys, right? It was the work that they're doing versus an infographic versus a, so just thinking about the audience and so how.
Right, and I have infographics in here too because I knew that was one of the things that they did it. So the audience, in my opinion, you're asking about the audience that they're creating for. Yes, I think it doesn't matter because it's really about trying to give them the tools that they could communicate to any audience. As I don't think this is going to end here at school. What's going to happen is they have a new idea for a software app. They have to put together a presentation. They didn't study any graphic design. How are they going to pull together a PowerPoint presentation with absolutely no visual education? And if I had $1 for every, even within the fields, visual fields like industrial design and architecture, they all hire graphic designers because they recognize that they can't design visual communications. But it's funny because those kind of tangent areas can see that they can't do it. Whereas I think the expectation in a marketing or business firm or an IT firm is more likely to throw this presentation together without any kind of knowledge of visual communication.
Yeah, it takes care of ubiquity at the tool.
Yeah.
It needs people to believe that the skills are also ubiquitous in learning.
Yes, yes.
So it's interesting. I haven't thought about it in that way because often when I think about communication, I think about audience and sort of other forms of communication. You want to be careful and think about, okay, I'm going to shape the message to meet the expectations or the needs of a particular audience. But you're suggesting in graphic design that the principles are more universal for the most part?
It's both. So I'm not talking about shaping content. I think what we do now for shaping content is what is expected in communications. So all of our rubric for communications, which we've looked at, and even our definition of communications is content-based. There is nothing about how you deliver the content so somebody can receive it. So they're both things. So in graphic design, like for instance, Mike and I work on Capstone together, we spend a lot of time on content, but they've had 4 years of how to present that content. What is the right form? How do I design a page so people can receive it? And when I look at some of the posters floating around school, they're not too great. Like, there's a million things on them. I can't find what I'm supposed to look at. I don't understand. There's no clarity. There's no hierarchy. And it's not their fault. They haven't been taught it. And I understand that in order to correct that problem, what I am saying is that you, all of you, have to start teaching visual communications. I am saying that. So if we can look at it from a humanities-based approach, I think it will make more sense to the whole entire school and keep in line with who we are and what we do. So that's what I'm setting out here to do. Not to say that I wouldn't love to have every single person take one of our design courses, and we have courses for non-majors, but the reality of the situation is that it takes room in 120 credits, and they're not all going to get it. And yet, they're going to have to swim in a world that demands them to be visually awake, is the right word, maybe? I don't know, visually alert to the things that they're seeing and putting together. Yep. I think we had a question or hand.
Yeah, those me, Suzanne. I mean, it sounds like what you're describing, the assumption that all these people are going to need to swim in that world is, you're absolutely right. And I think it's rooted in an assumption that everybody can see, so everybody is visually competent, right? Which, as you know, is not how it works. And it's always something I feel echoes with, well, everybody's human, so everybody understands culture, right? Well, you don't. There's an expertise in it. And partly what you're getting at here, it sounds to me like, and correct me if I'm kind of misguiding, there is some expertise, there are multiple levels of expertise, obviously, here, that we can begin to expose our students to in a more broad way to get them a little bit of swim fins.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. And you'll see as we go through this, Mike, that I'm trying to swim in your world. So that's why I said, correct me if I'm saying things that are incorrect, because I am going to teach this from what I was taught, my visual information. But these are people much smarter than me, obviously, that has come from a philosophical standpoint. So what you'll see in these exercises is I'm not using designers to teach. I'm using, all of them come from humanities. And so that's what I'm saying. I'm gone into your fields to find help to help your students, if that makes sense. Yes.
As I was looking at the competencies slide you had up, so I, just a little bit of background quickly. I worked with the blind and visually impaired for a long time. And in particular, I had a company and we were trying to create technology and learning materials to enable the blind to be able to draw and to communicate through pictures. And what was really important to me that I learned is this is the level below the broader picture, which is these are perceptual still.
Yes.
And what me inclusive is important enough use to focus on necessarily just vision, because we perceive the world through 5 senses and maybe more. And we communicate through this 5 senses as well. And so like all presentations and like communication involved sometimes just one, but usually more than one. Like in your talk that you're talking, that can be like audio. So what I'm getting at is that I think it would be more inclusive to me to say communicating through pictures or communicating graphic, because visually, like, so the
That's really good.
blind artists can actually draw with perspective who've never had sight or blown up sight.
Yes.
And so, so just thinking back to that, like how to include that in the overall
In the presentation.
competencies
That's, yeah.
is the yeah you can do this presentation.
Yep.
I learned this over time. It's like that, and I came to the idea that it's really communicating through pictures. Again, the visual means, and you can do that without drawing.
Yeah, and I would, as we go through this, I will try to remember, nowadays in graphic design, everything has to be done for readers. So you're looking at it's driven from CSS, but it's hierarchical. So it definitely falls inside what I'm about to show. So I'll try to remember to show you where there are areas where it's important, not just for visual, right, but for organization. And I think that's primarily what all of these are. Remember, everything I should just go to the next one. Everything that I'm going to show you right now is humanities-based. It's not coming from artists and designers, it's coming from humanities. And so I think that's really important because its purpose has never been to just be visual. Its purpose has always been broader than that. So these exercises are meant to involve visual communications as a final product. I've already said this. These are things that I've seen at Champlain that are being asked of the students, not in their visual classes, but in their core classes, their humanities classes. So yeah, this is what I'm seeing, which is asking a lot of your students. So I'm just gonna flip. Okay, so you're right. This is exactly, I think you said perception, that's exactly where we are. So the first exercise is Gestalt. Now, I think most of you in this room are probably familiar with this. Am I correct? Gestalt principles? Okay, vaguely. All right, so this is all about visual perception and conscious observation. But it's more, it's organizational, and it feeds directly into UX, UI, and into web structure. So all of those, it is also non-visual. So it's about organization of information at its root. I am going to go through quite quickly Gestalt and we're doing 7, not 6. And so some of you might be like, why are you not doing 6? Because I'm going to use the Pragnos, I hope I'm saying that right, principle as one of the 7, okay? We'll go through each one of these. This is I think this would be a first step. I feel like this could be done in many different places across campus. You could provide some of this knowledge, and you could do it simply with using a phone. All of these have been designed, again, to just use a phone or a slide, Google Slides. So we're going to actually ask them to find these principles in existing images or to take photos of these principles out in the world with their cameras, their phone cameras, be able to recognize them, understand them, and then in turn use them, which is a lot. But they're kind of simple, they're beginning steps for designers, but I think they make sense for everybody. So it's making conscious observations and being aware of what visual perception is. And then also, if you understand visual perception, you can actually find layers of meaning behind those visuals. So that's what we're looking for. So that's just the overview. Here, this is really all of them up, but I'm going to actually take them apart and show you them individually. So don't worry about the tiny type. But it's basically, the word means global form, and what it does is it emphasizes how humans perceive patterns and organize information. So it's getting back to that organization, even above visualization. It explains how humans see things, how they make sense of the world around them, and also the patterns that they can see as they go through it. So figure ground is the first one. Figure ground. The reason we have figure ground, getting to the root of it, is it helps us understand what we need to notice and what we do not need to notice. You think, well, that's pretty obvious, Suzanne. Well, if you saw some of the posters that I've been seeing around school, it's not. There's 15 focal points. I don't know where to look. I don't know what's important. And they definitely don't understand that when we look at a poster, we need to understand what's important. There may be background stuff going on, but if we can't understand at a brief glimpse that that poster is about X, then it has failed.
This is implications in our use of Canvas also instructionally.
Yes.
Because for a lot of our students, it's extremely difficult to tell what's important and what's not.
Yeah, I know. I think in general, you have to think about these poor students. They're in a world where they're hit with information constantly, and it's very hard for them to figure out what they need to pay attention to. They get scattered, they don't know what they're doing, and so this seems very basic, but it's not basic. It's just stating that you need to be careful on making sure that what you're looking at is what is intended to be looked at. And that is rule number one. And I know that anybody in the school could teach this to the students, but we're not. But we should. So this is the first one. So does anybody have a question about figure ground?
No, but it does occur to me that we wouldn't have to teach it regarding Canvas if we could standardize the usage of Canvas among all the faculty, which I understand might be a big ask, but we wouldn't actually have to teach the salience here. If everybody knew that in every course they would ever attend, where you find your assignments here, office hours here, was standardized that way.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I think we still have to teach the students because the Canvas is one space where they have to swim in too much information, but their lives are full of too much information. I mean, think about it. I watch their screens. It's horrifying. And I also feel like more so than us, they have no filters, so they don't know how to filter information. So they're hit with all these things. And so it's not surprising then that when I see posters, I don't know how to look at a poster or a website or anything. I don't know how to look at anything that they present me, right? This is not surprising because they live in this world. So more than anything, figure ground is the first way to help them understand that there has to be important things and things that are less important.
Like the first generation of HTML, when people figured out they could do these things, they did everything on every page.
Yes, well, they're doing that now. And, to be honest with you, so are the design students. It takes me a good year to get them to stop doing that. Yeah, so, they fill every space on everything with every idea they have.
A year, I think probably 3.
Right? So that's right, Robin. We have to deal with it. Every single space on a poster is filled with more information. And they think
don't
that's
have
good.
enough information, they just make it bigger.
Yes. I think that is true.
Yeah.
Yes.
True.
Right. So that's the first one that could get covered in any class. Any one of you could teach this. It's not hard. The second one is closure. This is important because it helps regulate how much information. So what this means is that when we see something that isn't closed or isn't finished, we complete it. And that can be with words, that can be with information. You don't have to worry about a person's head being chopped off in a photograph because you know the rest of the head is there. So what I'm saying is this gets back to that whole thing that we as humans can close gaps. So you don't need to put everything on the page because we will actually close the gaps. That's a big deal for students. I know that when I'm trying to teach even my students about legibility, they're like crazy about it. Like every letter has to be seen. And I'm like, it doesn't. We will read it without seeing part of it. But in general, as you're crafting visual items, you can be sure that you don't have to close everything. There is an ability we see patterns. Humans are very good at seeing patterns. And so therefore, there's not a need to put every bit of information on something because we can get it. So that's the second rule. The third rule, and I love this one, is proximity. So when you put two things together, then there is a relationship. So if you're taking photographs and you want to convey that these two people know each other, you put them together. And I know some of this seems very basic, and especially to me because I've been doing this my whole life, but the point is it's not. So when you tell students, if you're trying to convey warmth in your posters, or you're trying to convey some sort of relationship, the first thing that you should look at is proximity. Like, how close are they in the image? I mean, if you're doing anything, and that's not just image, it's information. So if information is visually put together, a simple thing I can equate to in typography is if you put a subhead closer to text, that text belongs to the subhead. If you evenly spaced out a subhead, a text, and a heading, no one knows what they're connected to. These are small things that make huge differences to people in understanding what is going on, and especially in a day when we're really fast. So just the simple thing of moving that subhead closer to a piece of body copy, it then makes sense to that body copy. That is a small thing and makes a huge, I can tell you right now, it makes a huge difference on how fast the person can receive the information. So the idea of proximity is really important.
You see that a lot in political landscapes.
Yes.
For politicians and know for years to
Stand.
who stands next to them. Or on the flip side, if you're trying to denigrate somebody, having it framed so they're standing next to something that's unpleasant.
Yes, yes.
And
I
in terms
agree.
of disciplinary literacy, it's much easier, like your placement, for example, of the word proximity right in your body paragraph, or like in bold but next to it, is so much easier for somebody with a language-based learning disability to process that's what's happening in the text.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a shortcut that helps a lot.
And you know, the funny thing is when I look at these, they're very basic understandings of human nature and how we see things, but they aren't being, they're not intentionally, that's the right word, intentionally being taught in all of our classes. And I think it's a mistake because we're asking them to do visual solutions without going through this. So the next rule is similarity. And this is about the fact that if they, there's many ways to group them together. So shape, color, size, texture. But if you have a grouping and they share similarities, they're automatically part of a group. So you'll see this, designers have known for a long time, getting back to college marketing materials, that if you put a diverse group of students and you make them, sort of have some similarities, like they all have Champlain shirts on or hats, or they're all wearing blue, I mean, something like that, we automatically see them as all students that go to this school. So there's little tiny hints, and it can be anything. It can be as simple as they all have on backpacks. That immediately says, okay, they're part of the group called students, including the different looking students from each other. So it's one way to get across the idea that these people belong. So that's the next rule. Continuation. This is kind of similar to closure in my opinion, but it's the idea that space goes on and on. So when you're looking at something, it doesn't change patterns. Like if we put something out there, we can assume that it will continue on different pages or different sets. People see patterns as continuous. And that can work for you and that can work against you. But the idea, whether it is something simple like page numbers, you put page numbers always in the same place. All you designers that might be hearing me. Because you're training them to see continuance, right? So the idea of continuance is that these things will exist nonstop. So setting up systems is a result of this particular rule or principle. And that is something I've noticed. There aren't systems. I mean, but that's a lot to ask of a student that hasn't had visual classes. I mean, it's easy for an animation system. They rely on systems and continuance. But for a student majoring in IT or something in psychology, why would they even know that? But you can't change where your page numbers are. You know, you want this idea that it is going to keep going, that the patterns and the paths will keep going in the same location, in the same place.
That also distinguishes high-performing students from less performing students.
Yes, but is that fair? Like, shouldn't we be teaching them about these rules so that everybody can be high-performing students, right? And it gets back to, they're not going to have me.
Yeah.
The chances of your students having me are like very, very minor. So I'm actually really asking you this to teach these things so that they can all be high-performing students.
Because like even when we're setting up their calendars, like that, you guys kind of too, like helping them to make patterns in when
Yeah.
you're studying.
Yeah.
What are they studying? How do these things repeat? How does it go on for 16 weeks and then stops? Like that pattern recognition and continuity is present for the high performers and absent.
Yes, I agree.
As well.
Yeah. And then uniform connectedness, it means exactly what it looks like, that even though there's distinctions, that they're somehow connected. And this really gets into UX UI. Like when we do site maps and everything else, we know that they're not the same, but we know that they have a relationship. So establishing, this is another systems one, these both are systems based. So establishing a group despite the distinctions is super important. I'm going to test you in a few minutes, so I hope you guys are grabbing this. Anyway, any kind of tab navigation is an example of that, because you know that they're connected, yet they have their own individual identities. But I'm actually going to make you do this with a photograph in a few minutes, so you'll see the difference. I feel like this one is the easiest for all of us faculty to understand because we have to do this every day. But it doesn't mean our students understand it. And I think that with Gestalt, it's very easy as adults that have been in the world a long time to think they have this. I think they have this. And even my design students don't have this. So, you're really looking at things that were not taught in high school. Gestalt is too complicated for someone to teach in high school. It's up to you. And then this is the last one, which we can debate on whether this is Gestalt, but I'm leaving it anyway. It's pragnos. So this is the idea of simplicity. This is my favorite. It says that people want to see simplicity because it taxes them less, right? So it's the idea of when you have something that is in its simplest form, it will be its most understandable. And that is huge for people that can't design. If I could underline this 10 times, this is the one I would want to underline. It is, if you don't know how to design and you don't know how to organize pages with lots of levels of hierarchy and compositional space and negative space, keep it simple. And this is what I'm not seeing in this school. And it's because, again, they're like in this world of put more on the page, put more information on the page. You have to tell them this is, and then you have to tell them you're right, because I think they'll tell you you're not right. But it's true. And if they don't know how to design and they're new visual producers, then this is the easiest way of not screwing up.
I find that happens a lot when we're doing prototyping and the students and seniors, they begin to understand the power of the sort of minimalist approach that can convey their ideas without going into modeling out every facet of it. Some do better than others, but busy.
Yeah. I have a quick video on this one if we want to take the time. We can, it's like 2 minutes. But this...
Designing Gestalt principle pronouns. We have traditionally prefer elements organized or reduced to their simplest and that state. Deeply corn.
I know this got him.
Day.
He was at the house.
I was asked by employee, how do you curdle? The old man answered, just simply remove everything that is notable. The ability to simplify means to eliminate the unnecessary in order that the necessary may speak, to put the client's Hoffman. All the Gestalt principles of perceptual organization fall under the overreaching law of pronouns. The simple and most stable interpretations are always favored. We strive to see objects as simple, regular, and symmetrical as possible. Confronted with ambiguous elements, our minds instinctively perceive the complex as simple and the incomplete as complete. We prefer design with good Gestalt, balance, regularity, order, clarity, simplicity, symmetry, harmony, and unity over chaos and discord. The law of pronouns is a core belief of the famed German Bauhaus school of design
founded by Walter Krubis in 1998. Krubis advocated functionality over the ornamental. What's the real-life application? Less is more. You've all heard this. Always remove that which is not needed to accomplish the task. If you're designing a message clearly functions without any one element, eliminate that element unless it communicates a desired stylistic flair.
So he is, the reason that I picked him is because he was with me at this NASAD meeting that I just came back from. And he and I were talking about, didn't want to get there yet. He and I were talking about which gestalt would you, if you can only do one for everybody non-visual, what would you do? And he said it was this one. He said, I made a video. And I was like, okay. And it's funny because in that video, he mentions my professor, Hans Allemann, from college, and Deb Kehoe's as well. We both had him. So it was kind of funny. But it's because we came from a school that was Bauhaus-based, and so these things we grew up with. But yes. So that's the video. So this one to me, in some ways, and is the most important in the sense that if you don't know better, just make it simple. Then the figure and ground doesn't become a problem because, you only have one thing. So it's a way of possibly doing it. Did we get a question?
Elin has a question.
Yeah.
Yes, could you share that URL? Like, we can't copy it and we couldn't see it.
I can share the whole slide presentation with whoever wants. Yeah, great. Okay, so going to the next one, here is your quiz.
But
All right. All of these represent one of those things up there. So let's start with the first image, the black and white. I don't even want to say what it is because I feel like that takes away from it. What do you think that this best fits? This is like a thing. There's only one right answer for every one of them. So even if there's multiple things, I might tell you you're wrong.
It's either proximity or uniform connections.
Yeah.
Those are his personally.
Yeah. So it's proximity. So when you're looking and you want to talk about people, so the communication is that it's a rainy, dark day. You want them to focus on the umbrellas to understand that that's what's important. So what you do is you put 3 umbrellas in the picture in close proximity. They become focal point. They therefore become what the poster is about or the photo is about. So proximity actually changes the way we understand that photo. If we had had the 3 people spaced out, what would it be about? Not the weather, it would be about what? If they were all over the space in there. Anyone?
Similarity?
No? I mean, from a conceptual point, what would they be about? If they, you had, like somebody's here and somebody's over here and somebody's...
space.
Yes.
Yeah.
The location.
Yeah.
So it would then be about the location instead of about the weather. Do you see how important this is? Right. Okay, good. One underneath it, what's it about? This is a tricky one.
Figure ground. Continuation.
Nope.
Figure ground.
Figure ground. Who said figure ground? You are smart. Well, you're a visual person. You're like a ringer. Anyway, yes. So watch this. So compositionally, the person is not big. That's why I wanted to do it to fool you. But compositionally, this tree takes you to the person. This tree takes you to the person. This thing takes you to the person. Everything takes you to the person. So compositionally, you're such a ringer. So compositionally, it's figure ground because we dismiss the trees, we dismiss the fencing. That's not important. We dismiss it. Everything goes to that person. Even though they're small, this is a good use of figure ground.
I don't see that. I see branches. I see the branches are the most important thing here.
Real.
But they're pointing a character.
Yeah.
That's an intention of the person that maybe took it in your interpretation, but I don't see it that way.
Well then.
I see it as about notice what's in the foreground. It's interesting also.
And that's because most ways of solving figure ground are to put the big thing in the front.
I know.
So you're trained to see it that
I wasn't
way.
trained to see the other thing, but I'm saying I think it's confusing.
Yeah, it could be for some people, but it's definitely an example of
For even
figure
the
ground.
trained eye, and it's
Mhm.
that term. But
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would disagree with you, but it's all up for interpretation, which is why we're talking about interpretation. So yeah. So what about this one in the middle, the colorful one? The next one. What's that? This is a good example of this. How about people online? Do you guys know what that one is with the yellow? No one? It's continuation. So we know. Yeah, what is it? A picture of?
Because we know that it's because we know what that is.
Yes.
Skydiver.
Yes.
Jump.
Yes. So we didn't have to see the parachute and the thing. We didn't need to see any of that because we know what that is. So that's a great example.
Yeah, if we've had adequate exposure to that concept.
Yes.
It's like somebody sitting at
Which
truck driver as well.
and this
It
is
trades.
yes, it could be a race car driver. And so it comes down to, why is it important that you guys teach it? Because you're talking about cultural, social context in your coursework. So that is a perfect example of what should be taking place in the classroom. Does it read the same if you're not, haven't been exposed, right? It needs to be a conversation. What is happening now is there's no conversation. And that's it doesn't work, because visuals are so, like, no matter what, people see the visual and then recontextualize the text. So if you're using a visual, you're already putting them in a space, but what if that space isn't right? That means that anything you're telling them after that, they see through the lens of a race car driver instead of a skydiver. And that is a problem. No matter how you look at it, the students should be considering it. You know, we could sit there and disagree on figure of ground, but the point is that the conversations need to take place, and they are culturally and socially linked. So, yeah. So what about this one? I'm sorry, I just told you something completely wrong. This is closure, not continuance. Did you say closure? You said closure.
No, I did say.
Yeah, this is, whoa.
Oh, yeah, because
It's continuous. Now I've given up the next one. Continuous is the next one. So it's the idea that space continues. Yes.
This was this one. It was figure ground.
Yeah, it was.
I thought that was figure ground.
No, this isn't figure ground. This is continuous. You see how the pieces take you out? Like, they're not going to fall off a cliff right now. Road is going to continue. The space is going to continue as you travel down it. But I just knocked this one, which is crazy because I knew what this was. But this is actually closure.
Closure. It's closure off
Yes,
the page.
yes.
So
What about this one?
that one is the uniform connections.
Nope.
But they're different, but they're similar.
It's similarity. Because the ones that are orange have a similar function, right? And the ones that are white aren't. But, they're all kind of close to each other, so it's just good to discuss it. But the one on the bottom with the street lights, what's that?
Correct.
Yes. Because we understand them to all be traffic symbols, even though they don't look the same. Got it? Okay. And then lastly has to be, the pebbles?
Canal breaks.
Yeah, you got
The
it.
Zen garden thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So understanding these tools of how to create or organize visual information will help students understand what needs to be on a page and what doesn't. And more importantly, it'll start discussions of context. And it's really important. They learn to see and they understand that the decisions, the photographs that they're choosing it has consequences. Yeah.
Playing good.
They would have to.
Suzanne, well, the part what you're pointing out, it sounds like to me, is the difference between teaching students a theory and teaching students how to think theoretically, and you're arguing that we need to do both.
Yes.
That the rare occasions when we do the one, we don't follow through with the other. And that doing both, which you do an awful lot of in the graphics and N program, is really how you get students to trying to think how it phrases. You mentioned earlier about how students don't feel like they can leave things off like poster, how they can rely on the audience to fill in information. It's because they're afraid. They're afraid that the audience doesn't know how to think theoretically, and so they feel like they need to fill everything in. And so if we can teach students the theoretical thinking and then how to think theoretically, we might actually build something.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mike. That's exactly it. And also, one thing that I know you know that you didn't say, but it also teaches them about the human experience. All of these are based on human patterns of seeing. And so you're talking about what it is to be human, what we agree on, what we can understand.
Yeah, and that relates to something Craig was asking about earlier about when we talk about audience. I mean, to understand the human is to understand human interaction, and visual communication is a human interaction between audience and person selling out. So that's a place for audience comes in. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And just one more thing, and that is that sort of what I was trying to get at with the original question I asked, is that these are considered to be more universal.
Yes.
Cultures, right?
Yes.
We're sort of hardwired to perceive in these certain ways.
Yes, and I would say, yes, that is correct. And they're supposed to be the base levels of visual recognition, right? So yes, they get built upon as you go through and start to do this. Like the next one, maybe it's the third one, where I have to speed it up, is based on semiotics, which you all know gets very, very complicated very quickly.
Has there been research across testing this sort of thing across various cultures?
Yes.
And getting consistent results?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, because it's not new, right? These are not new theories. Yeah.
I wonder too how it might have impact on like the neurodiverse students, like students, for example, on the autism spectrum. I wonder how they might either interact with imagery in a perhaps coming to different understandings about the images, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. It would be good to.
It varies with. I'm on the autism spectrum, and it varies by every individual. Like talking with my students, it's like sometimes it's hard to generalize.
Yeah,
it really is. But yeah, there are differences, particularly in different ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
But there's no way of generalizing that I found.
No, but even just the conversation in a classroom would be invaluable. Like just having that conversation in a classroom would be super important. So, we can, why do we do this? Why does this even matter? It enhances their ability to create, but I think more it shows us how to employ visual processing information, and they can play a role in other fields. So it's like how we process the information that's more important than actually the physical result. And then that just gets back to like understanding how to assess or understand complex information, right? So that's why it's important. Okay, so the next exercise, so that's one exercise, and that's on Gestalt. The next one, now I don't expect you to teach all 4 of these exercises. What I think is that you could pick and choose. Like this one seems to relate to what we're teaching today, so I'm going to teach you this one principle, not all of them, but one principle. Now this is from a totally different space. So this is about, and this is the name I told you that I have to think about whether I'm saying it right. Does anybody want to say this guy's name perfectly? I would say Bertin or Berton. Anyway, I think I've said it wrong my whole life, so I may have. Anyway, he is going to show us how to do visual variables. So we know that shape, orientation, color, texture, shades, and size are visual variables that can be used. But where I see this as a problem in Champlain is when you ask students to do charts, graphs, and maps. I've been noticing it, I've looked at it, it's an issue. So they have all of these things that they can use to organize, it's back to systems thinking, organize information so that we understand it. So having all of these helps us to better organize what we're talking about as variables. In graphic design land, we actually call that visual languages. But here with non-graphic design land, we call them visual variables, 2 different words. Okay, so here they all are. And I'm not going to go through and talk about each one of these, but they're all ways of representing data or information. And like I said, we do call them visual languages in graphic design speak. And then when we weave them together, we call it a narrative. So an example of a poster is, if it's working well, is a narrative, because there should be 4 or 5 languages working together to create a story. So this way, it's the same thing, but it's visual variables. And so he was a French map maker, which you guys probably would have guessed. He came up with all of these different ways of looking at information: texture, values, hue, scale, size. And then the way that translates out is this. This is student work. So this talks about how many company presidents in Japan in their space. So they're actually using buildings, representations of buildings. And I think this one's really clever. A non-designer, non-art student did this. And notice that they have, they're using shape, they're using color, they're using a lot of these organizational techniques to make their map more understandable. So if you're going to assign a map, it would be a good idea to go through what visual variables are able to be used so that they can understand that the more that they use, the more languages come together and the more of a story they can tell, right? So that's the point with this particular exercise, is to have them create a map by engaging these visual variables, which you can easily find online too. So that's another exercise you could do with them. Or if you're already having them do maps or data processing or data visualization, you could at least bring up the philosopher, the map maker, and ask, are you thinking about all these things that you can use? Because they're systems of visual organization. Yes.
This makes me think of mechanical drawing.
Yes.
And the hierarchy of line style, it's really elegant. It's been refined over years. It's so much information is communicated unambiguous with the kind of grammar and graphical and grammar and syntax.
Yes.
And it's amazing.
Yeah, if you're ever wanting a book, Richard Saul Warman's book, Understanding USA, is amazing. He asked all these prominent graphic designers to look at the United States in different ways, and they're all visual, and they're all different, and they're beautiful. Like this design firm did one, this design firm did the other. It's really quite gorgeous. But what my point is that we use this. We assign this all the time. Do a map, do a chart, but do you actually tell them how to do it, or what's available to them to use, or how, if they know these systems, they have languages they can use to, the systems, because they won't stop and think about it. They're not able to pull this stuff up out of their brains. You'll have to give it to them. And it comes from a place that's from the humanities, it comes from a study, and so there it is, it exists. The next one, which is what I was actually going to have you do, but now we don't have enough time to do it, so I'm just going to have to walk you through it. This is my favorite. It's denotation and connotation. And I'm sure that you all talk about this, but just in case you don't, this is Barth's concepts of denotation and connotation, which is the beginnings of semiotics. And we learned this in my sophomore graphic design class, but it's really easy to do. And this one, in my opinion, is the most important of everything I'm showing you today. So if you ask them to take photos, give them a word, and then you ask them to go take photos of that particular word, and then you'll get back this. Whoops, I should have defined it first. So first you want to define, I kind of think you all know this though, but the students won't. So you need to define what denotation and connotation is and where it came from. And then once you define this, then you're able to ask them to do something. So the word given here is connect. These images are 9 images based on connect. So they, but look at all these meanings from these words. It could be safety and security, trust and dependence, bonding and affection, learning and exploration, comfort and reassurance, but it also could be child abduction. So the point I'm saying is that connotation is extremely important, and this is the number one problem I see, is photos that are used inappropriately, because that can be offensive, they can cause problems, and we ask people to select photos daily. and the damage they can do. Mike teaches a whole section in our capstone about a design firm that makes a mistake using a photo of a child, thinking that it was healthcare, right, Mike?
It's an NGO that's promoting health programs.
Yeah, and they used a single child in black and white. And in the culture that it was in, do you remember which South American country it was?
Not off the top of my head.
Anyway, seeing a child like that was distressing and scary and terrible and not something that they would want to do in healthcare. And it was a terrible mistake. And those kind of mistakes graphic designers still make, but your students need to be able to look at what they're choosing and think about this for a minute. So what is a great exercise is to give them a verb like connect. I was going to give you guys the word communicate, seeing how we're talking about it. But, communicate, you can imagine we would all find images of communicate, like just for random things. Bob, what would you show as communicate if you could find a photo?
Oh, off the top of my head, probably, I don't know, picture or website or something.
Okay, anyone else? Something different?
Yeah,
People talking?
yeah.
So we have technology, people talking, like it's unbelievable what we get back. The point is that everybody brings their images here, and then we look at them out of context and we start writing down all the connotations. And then the second part of this exercise is then we pick one, and if the set that we're picking is trust and dependence from this list, then you have to recontextualize the photos and tell me now which ones are trust and dependence and which ones do we have to go out and search more for. If every student learned to do this with photography instead of just slamming it down on their presentations or their posters, this one tiny step, we might get better in not offending people, not making things that are totally the wrong communication. It's like taking a deep breath. Like before I use that photo, perhaps I need to think about what the connotation of it is and make sure it's what I want it to be.
This is what good advertising agencies do.
They do, and they make mistakes still, right? So then I was going to have you all upload your images and we were going to do this together. We just don't have time. And the words that I thought would be good to take were communicate, break, and check. They all have completely different meanings and multiple meanings. And so writing up all of the meanings and then trying to make sets from the meanings. Why is that important? Because you're asking the student to recontextualize their decision. Like now that I'm looking at through the lens of trust and dependence, does it still work? Do you see how it's a filtering effect? If all you did was teach your students this one exercise, we would be so much better off. Like in the whole presentation, just this one exercise. Because it will help them to take a breath and say, wait a minute, what am I doing here? Yes.
Do you have an example of a poster that you like that might have, and we were talking about posters before, that embody all these kind of things. Do you have an example of one like that you could show on the screen that was just
Off the top of my head, of any poster?
Oh, what could you mention ones that just didn't work? I just wanted to...
Oh, I mean, yeah, because there's a book, Stephen Heller, that Mike and I use in the capstone class that has all sorts of failured, ones that don't work. I mean, there's lots of ones that do work.
Well, I just wonder, like, what was your...
No, I mean, I would be very happy to put together a second follow-up presentation with a whole bunch that work and a bunch that don't work if you want me to. Yeah, I'm happy to do that for all of you. Yeah.
With a lot of literature historically, too, about propaganda posters that cover the whole thing of it.
Yeah. And, I have to tell you something. This is totally an aside, and I know we're running out of time, so I shouldn't do it, but who cares? When I came out of design school, I was approached by the CIA, and I went through the first, so many application steps, like you have to take tests and blah, 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 blah. And the work that I would do, what they could tell me was a lot of propaganda that they put into third world countries and other places that looks like a third world country, wherever the native person in wherever it was did it. So it's this idea of we disseminate information under the guise of looking like it came from whatever country we're putting it into. So this is a common thing that the CIA still does.
Not just that, just virtually every country.
And every corporation. I mean, honestly, everybody controls the way people receive images and photos. But that skill is incredibly important and is used all the time.
And this skill, unlike yourself, is much more culturally.
Yeah, and that's why I said if you just taught one of these exercises, this would be the one I would want you to teach. There's too many mistakes, and the stakes are too high. When you make a mistake, the stakes are very high. So, do we have a hand go up? I thought I heard a ding. Nope, we're okay. All right.
Amanda's message to me.
All right. So the last exercise, which I'll spend the least amount, is that we even ask students, and I think this is more rare at Champlain, but we ask them to do little videos with no understanding about time. And this happens in classes. And so this exercise is meant to help them understand how time passes. So you can do this exercise so they understand that, you know, studying 6 hours of what happens, like it helps them understand the passage of time. So all I'm saying is if you are going to assign a video and they've never done time-based media, this is like the very minimum. You have to at least teach them understand how to understand time. And so this is a quick exercise. And this one I actually didn't even write. One of the faculty members that I was at NASED with wrote this. And I think it's really useful. Yes?
When we look at images, a lot of what we see gets into our subconscious before we have a chance to process it, right? So learning to see, learning to notice all these things is something you can learn. Do you think people could learn to not be affected by, to sort of have a little more control over that?
I actually don't. I think what they get affected by it, and what they can learn is to then reassess it.
That's what I mean.
Yes, they can learn to do that.
To then consciously
They
be aware
can.
that you may have been affected by it.
And then just take a breath. Like that's really what all of this is about, is taking a breath and trying to understand what we just did. It's always sort of a struggle between writers and designers. And probably, I tell my students this all the time, the biggest struggle I ever had with this is National Geographic and the Smithsonian. I don't know which one was worse, where the writers there fully understand that when I show a photograph or a quote that's been raised up, it recontextualizes their whole article. They see the image before they see anything. They see the content through the lens of the image. If you bring a quote up, the next step is any big type. They see everything under that through the lens of the big type. And they understand that the visual is a more immediate response. So you can be intellectual and say, okay, that's not going to affect me. I'm going to read this. But an example I give my students is I work a lot with Maryland State Department of Education. And one year, the male graduates in the college system in Maryland it's just declining, terrible. But they needed funding from the feds and from the state to run the programs that will boost the male graduation rate. But they can't show the numbers on the graph because if they do, no one would give them money. So what I said to them is, let's do huge photos of these men with their stories, the ones that are succeeding, not the general group. And sure enough, I put these big photos of young men and how they've succeeded, this 5 that I handpicked. Nobody read any of the small print. They got their funding. That was the end of it. So understanding how this stuff works is extremely important, for students, because whether or not they're graphic designers or not, they swim in this world of all this visual communication, and they need to at least understand how they're affected. So if nothing else, if you can teach them to go, wait a minute, why do I think this? Just one tick of a moment to analyze why they feel the way they do, they would be so much better off. All right, so student outcomes, so exercise 1 and 2 are mostly visual perception, if you remember. And conscious observation, so understanding what we see. 3 and 4 is creative thinking, so trying to understand connotation and denotation. All of that is creative thinking for communication. So it depends on what you were doing in your class, whether or not which one you would use. And then this is perfect because we have 3 minutes left. My point is here's our competency. I've just talked to you about everything that visual does. Is this sufficient? Is it? And the point is like, you're assigning students posters, presentations, videos. They're just living in this world, being affected by advertising, web, Instagram. If we're not teaching them how to understand what they're seeing, I think we're doing them a disservice. And I think that we should all be reevaluating our communications competency to include some of this information.
And in some ways, it would be better if you just ditched reading, thinking, writing, and speaking and just said the ability to convey ideas and using event. Because when you start to enumerate specific things, you give the expectation of a finite set. And it's not a finite set, really. It's much broader than that. We can't list everything. It's too awkward. So I would say ditch the specifics and do the more broad basics, which would include more today as a starting point.
As a starting point, but I don't think it's enough. I think everyone has to teach some basics of visual communication. Just because we owe it to our students not to be manipulated, to make decisions that affect their business life and their professional life in an educated way, to consider what they're putting out in the world, but also consider what they're receiving. And I think we're not doing it. And I think it's got to change, especially if Champlain goes forward and we start to integrate classes more and there are more students doing visual coursework. I mean, we need to make these changes.
Should we group them into meta categories like text, image, sound, or something like that?
We can.
It's a little bit better than the very specific ways. I think that may be the path to go.
But I do think, like, I know that Mike teaches philosophy in some of his classes, and Gestalt is a perfect, place to put that in. And it's really talking about human experience. So anyway, that's it. I didn't make you do any work, which is good, except for our quiz that I screwed up. So, yeah. And I just left it with this. This is our current, and all I said is the light gray type. I was thinking maybe how we can make some changes on some of our current.
And you're going to post this, or you're going to give us access to this?
Sure. Yeah,
I
absolutely.
want to steal a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, and I'm sorry that I couldn't make you work. Think about communications and 9 photos and what would you do, and then, you can do it on your own.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for
Thank you, Suzanne.
And I'm sorry, Felipe, you got it right. Closure.
Yeah.
So good
That's
job.
how. Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.